Hello, my name is Kevin. I am a First Nations advocate with Dementia Australia. For more than 50,000 years, we have come together to trade knowledge, to learn and to teach. Today, we join to keep up that tradition. So with that in mind, we now pay our respects to the traditional owners, to elders past and present, to those First Nations people joining us here today.
Welcome to Hold the Moment, a podcast from Dementia Australia. These are real stories from people living with dementia or caring for their loved ones.
I'm Hamish McDonald. I cared for my dad, who was living with Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia.
And I'm Jim Rogers, and I'm living with younger onset Alzheimer's.
So Jim, this episode I think is a particularly sensitive one. And I thought maybe we should have a bit of a chat at the outset.
Okay.
Because I can only imagine that for you, this is difficult to even think about, let alone talk about. And it's the end point. It's the dying bit.
It's the scary bit.
Yeah. How much have you talked about it, thought about it?
I've thought about it off and on. I'm in the mode of being super positive at the moment and so busy that I haven't really focused too much on any of that. But there was a time when I was really digging into end of life and that sort of thing, what your capabilities are, how you're allowed to do that with a dementia diagnosis. So yeah, I know that is still around, but I'm trying to still keep that on the top shelf for the time being.
So this episode, really, we're going to focus on palliative care, but I think it's worth addressing up front that many of the people you and I have met over the past few years doing this podcast have wanted to talk about VAD, voluntary assisted dying.
Yeah.
Because so often when someone receives a diagnosis of dementia, that's one of the things they then want to know about. And
absolutely.
The reality is that under the laws that have been introduced in the different states and territories in Australia, a dementia diagnosis effectively rules you out of having VAD available to you, because you have to be cognitive and have capacity in those final months of your life to be able to make that decision for a doctor to review you, assess you, and sign off at it. So there's still some way to run in terms of that conversation, and it's going to be a public conversation, no doubt a political debate. But we kind of want to acknowledge that up front, that is a question for many people. I think am I fair to say it's been a question for you?
Absolutely, and it's something that I am quite interested in, and I really don't like the thought of going to the end stages where you've got no control over your faculties or where you are or who's looking after you. So I'm very interested in what are those options. So for me, I don't want to go that full journey if I can avoid it. But there's a fine line there in when do you make the decision.
So as a result of those conditions around voluntary assisted dying, the reality is for most people, palliative care is a really important part of the conversation. And if you are thinking ahead, planning ahead. So that's what we're going to focus on really in this episode. And having gone through the end stages with Dad, as much as it wasn't a situation that he ever wanted or would have wished for, the end was very beautiful. And I think the way that the healthcare professionals delivered that environment, that context, that setting for him and for his family was beautiful. And I feel actually in the end very proud of how we were able to create those circumstances for him at the end.
I think that's vital. It's vital because it is obvious that's going to happen. And if somebody has got informed, experience, particularly in the field of dementia, that's magical. Really. So this is going to be interesting.
If you've ever been in a hospital setting, it's chaotic, it's noisy, it was frightening. We didn't know what was going to happen minute to minute. And then when we moved to palliative care, it was like moving into a safe space where the noise went away, the fear went away. I think there was grief, but, lots of love.
Betsy cared for her husband, Peter, who lived with younger onset Alzheimer's. And when Peter told her that he didn't want to move into residential care, she knew the end of his life would have to look a bit different to what she expected.
So Betsy's about to take us on a bit of a journey about how she did things for her husband, Peter, filled with love and care and a desire to give him dignity right until his last breath.
Hi, Betsy. Welcome to Hold the Moment. So to kick things off, would you be able to tell us a little bit about your husband, Peter?
Peter was diagnosed with young onset dementia at the age of 63, and he passed away late last year at the age of 66. It was pretty quick. He lived with dementia 3.5 years, and it was a pretty intensive time for all of us. Peter was a very courageous person and a really good person, and I look back on the time that we had while living with dementia, and I saw my role as a carer as helping him keep his dignity. But I really see now how courageous it was, what he did, putting himself out there, every day, trying to get out, do things, see people, when he had so many, challenges with aphasia and then, physical loss of ability to do tasks and things like that. So I think it's easy for me now, a year down the track, to look back and see the positive things, how well we lived right until the end, how courageous he was. Like I said, he was supported really well by his friends, his family. And, while no one wants to have a young onset diagnosis, it's kind of what you do with it that counts, I think. And I feel like I look back and I'm really, really happy at what we did with our time together.
Was that an overt conversation that you had together about how to approach it, or this was just how he did it and how you did it, and it somehow magically worked?
Yeah, it's funny. We didn't have a lot of what you would think would be conversations about it. I think there was a little bit of me knowing what he wanted and some very specific instances of him expressing things to me. And I call them the 3 things that he wanted. One being to live at home, even though I had explored some, residential living options with him. And 2 was to have a family holiday, the 4 of us, with our 2 daughters. And this had to be after the Olympics. So I don't know if you're aware, my younger daughter was in the Olympics. And so she came home in August. And then Peter passed away in November. So we had some really great time together, including that family holiday. And the 3rd wish of his was he, in not a lot of words, he made it quite clear he didn't want to be sustained in a way that, where his living was compromised. And he said it quite kind of like, when I get like this, but I knew what he was trying to say. So he didn't want to live in care. He didn't want to have to be, in a bed or, restrained. And, and that gave me focus, and, helping him live with dignity gave me purpose. And yeah, so it was really hard, but at the same time, there's a sort of satisfaction that comes from fulfilling his wishes and knowing I did everything I could to give him the quality of life that he wanted.
So was there any particular thing that sparked this conversation? What actually got you both talking about whether he was potentially going to have palliative care or something like that? How did that come about?
They were random conversations. So in the last year, he had a lot of challenges with aphasia. So there were a lot of conversations where I actually don't know what he was trying to say to me. I could only guess.
Betsy, I'm conscious that for some people listening, they might not actually know what aphasia is. Can you just describe that?
Sure. So it's when you have verbal challenges with the words that you want to say and you formulate in your brain. Somehow they get jumbled up between brain and your lips, and they come out, and it comes out as like mishmash. Like you don't, some words might make it through, but a lot of times it's just like verbal, just confusion. But I guess I look at it and say, well, it wouldn't have changed anything. I knew him well enough to know what he wanted. And like I said, I thought, oh, maybe we should move closer to family. Maybe we should move into residential care. And then you have a clear path, right? You have, independent living, assisted living, dementia care. And then, but that would have been for me. I wanted a clear path. But he didn't want a clear path. He wanted to be where he wanted to be, which was home. He had his people. He had his coffee shop. He had his support worker. And that scared me to say, like, we'll live here and just take it as it comes. But, it actually turned out, I guess, as well as it could be.
What you're talking about doesn't seem all that uncommon. We've heard a lot of accounts of people with a diagnosis saying, never want to go into residential care. But then somewhere along the journey, that becomes maybe dangerous or not the safest option, or it's not in their interest. How did you balance that decision?
So I think when we were in the last 12 months, and I started thinking about trying to move us into a facility which was going to offer a care path. And that was me. And I said, let's go visit this place. And it was after that he told me, and, is fairly in his way, that I want to stay here. I think those were the words he used.
At home.
At home. And, all I could say was, okay, well, we'll stay here as long as we can. And that's all I could say, because I didn't know if at some point down the track,
what was ahead?
It might be too hard for me. Right? So at that point, I could say, okay, and be okay with it. But I didn't know whether 6 months, 12 months down the track, I'd have to make a different decision. And, he had some issues with wandering at night, which is obviously a concern, and, some challenging behaviors. And at the end, it became unsafe for him and for us. So at the point where he went into hospital and then eventually palliative care, I knew that he couldn't come home again and be safe. And talking to people about, well, what can we do? The first thing I heard was, well, a young, strong male is not going to, it's going to be very hard to find a placement for him. So I'm like, wow, that's okay. That's not good.
No.
But it just, I think it became evident after a few days that he was resisting nourishment. And I was advocating for him, don't intervene, and I feel that in his way, by going in a hospital, he was deciding for himself, well, that's it then, right? Not to be fed, not to be, treated. And we had that conversation about, what we would do with that. We wouldn't intervene. And then, but in a hospital setting, there's lots of people that want to help.
Of course.
Come in with food and, things like that, medicines. He ran a fever, for example. And I just had to say, no, we're not going to intervene, and that he wouldn't want that. So, I know the decision to put him in a care setting was probably going to come at some point. I didn't know when, and I guess I just put that in that we'll deal with it when it happens. And it just turned out that, he was at home right up until the end.
So someone listening to this might think, well, what's the difference whether they go to hospital or whether it's palliative care? Why do I need to think about this? What, in practical terms, for you as a family, as a partner, what was different about going into palliative care compared with, say, staying in the hospital?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, if you've ever been in a hospital setting, it's chaotic, it's noisy. You talk to a lot of different people day to day, hour to hour, and I guess you find yourself telling the story. It's the same story over and over to different people who are coming to, offer their help. It was frightening. We didn't know what was going to happen minute to minute. And after a week, when they said we're going to move him to palliative care, we'd had discussions about he might pass away during the night. So I guess it wasn't like we didn't think he was coming home. We thought, okay, I guess we could be at end of life. And then when we moved to palliative care, it was like moving into a safe space where The noise went away. The fear went away. I think there was grief, but, lots of love. There was like room to breathe.
You mentioned a holiday that he wanted to go on, and you did go on that holiday. Your daughter had been to the Paris Olympics. She was in is it called the swim?
The artistic swimming team.
Artistic swimming. And you went to a place that you'd been many times before as a family. But something happened while you were there. There was a particular moment that you, I think, reflect on as kind of critical in Peter's journey when he was in the water. Can you share that with us?
Oh, okay. We went to a place in Queensland called Mooloolaba, which we used to take the girls to maybe once or twice a year. We went there a lot. So we got there and everything was quite okay. I think he felt the familiarity of the place because he was pretty settled. And then I had made the decision, we're going to go to Brisbane and see these relatives that, he's very fond of. And we did that. And it was a beautiful get together. It was just, I look back on it, he was so happy. But instead of going back to Mooloolaba, I made this decision, we'll go to a new place. And I look back on it and go, oh God, why did I think that going to a new place would be a good idea? It wasn't a good idea. Peter was very much a ocean person. He loved everything about it, surfing, swimming. But he was very unsteady at the end. And it was, I think, partly the dementia, partly his other condition. And he was fearful of the water. And so we went to this second area, this new beach. And that got him very agitated. And I realized, wow, that was not a good decision on my part. Live and learn. But it was only 3 days. I think we'll tough it out. Then on the last day we were there, we went down to the beach. It was a beautiful day. We had just one daughter with us at that time. And even though it was a surf beach, there was a sandbar that created this sort of pool between the waves and then the shore. And we were able to walk into that shallow pool, and I just saw this transformation where, Peter, he recognized it was the ocean, but he was able to float and not be scared.
Yeah.
And it was just a beautiful moment where he kind of was finally able to be free, let go, float there, enjoy himself. And I was thinking, oh man, this is the last day we're here. We've just gotten to the point of, we got it now.
Yeah.
But that's how it is. I think it was, I'm very grateful to have that moment, and like all of the moments that, all the good moments that we had, even, right up to the end. So do you think that was on his wish list, that holiday? It was.
Do you think having that come true and him having that experience, do you think that was impactful on him? Do you think he sort of had some connection with, this is a big tick for me?
I think he did. I know even when he was in the hospital, there was awareness there of some things, not everything, but things like that. Like even, for example, when our daughter was at the Olympics, he had to watch from home, but he was so riveted. He knew, right? There wasn't any question about him knowing what was going on. He never forgot who we were. And I know that can happen, but that didn't happen with us. And I'm very, very grateful for that.
Within a week of that beautiful moment in the water at Mooloolaba, you're back, you're in palliative care. It's your 25th anniversary. Can you talk us through that morning?
Once Peter had been moved into palliative care, it was the day before, and I said, this day is just for us. I said that to the girls. This day, no visitors, no one else. This day is just for us. And we spent the whole day in the room with Peter. And, one daughter was drawing, another one was, maybe playing music. And it was just so sacred. It was really special. And because comparing that to coming in the middle of the night because you think something bad's going to happen, you could just be present. And it was very peaceful. And so the next morning, I said to the girls, just sleep in. I'll go in early because I wanted that time with Peter. I wanted to have just us time. And I went, it was probably early, like 7:30 or something. And of course, the ward's quiet. You can just go to the room. You don't need, have to navigate anything. And I just sat there with him, and we probably had about 4 hours, just him and I. And you just reflect on, so many things, but, I think the good things, right? How it all came about, how we met, how, I came to Australia not knowing what Australia had in store for me, but, found Peter, found my, country that I call home now. There's so much great stuff there that I could just think about and, hope that he retained some of that. And then the girls came in around lunchtime and they brought us some flowers, which was lovely. And then, in the quiet, his breathing changed and we could just sense what was happening. And we were all sort of holding our breath and listening for probably what felt like about 15 or 20 minutes. And it just ceased. And it was so peaceful. And we weren't even sure, did that just happen? But, we were all there. So we went and called for the palliative care doctor, and he came and checked, and he said, yes, he's gone. But when I look at that time, and then the time after when you're allowed to stay, oh gosh, so grateful to be there, with him when he essentially let go. I don't know if I ever picture an ending that peaceful or that, beautiful, honestly.
So lovely to hear that it was a peaceful and lovely experience, which is such a difficult situation, isn't it?
Well, I think it's such a contrast to most of the stories we hear about dementia. The chaos, the noise, the drama, the high and the low emotions that come. But to have an end that is
on that anniversary,
dignified, that must mean a lot to you now.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And
to your girls.
Yeah, for all of us and for his legacy. Like I said, when I talk about Peter, we talk about, he was just a great person, a great friend, great dad, great husband, everything. But it's only recently, probably in thinking about what I would want to say with you is that, he really lived courageously with dementia. And I'm just full of, admiration for how he chose to go about it. He had a couple of moments where he was down about, oh, I can't do this anymore, I can't do that. But most of the time he just got on with it. And that was Peter. That was him getting on with it right to the end. So in that last month of October, so we had the family holiday, but we also had 2 dementia morning teas. Yeah, for, the Cup of Time fundraiser. Yeah. And they were so joyful. There were so many friends and supporters that came, and we were so happy. And then, a couple weeks later, I just say, Peter's not with us anymore. No one could believe it. But just to know that he had so many happy moments right up until he didn't, I can't help but just be grateful for that. I'm sad too, right? Peter should have lived much longer, right? He should have had the opportunity to experience, things like watching his girls, grow up more, even though they're young adults. But what do? You just get dealt the hand you're dealt, and you just decide, well, okay, this is how we're going to do it. And, you can't come through something like that and not know, not be a better person. I think you're stronger. The resilience is there. Who you can call on. That's going to be in your network. And, your friendships and relationships are profoundly changed when you go through that experience together. So, probably going to get sick of this word, but I'm so grateful for that.
That's so good. I think it's so good, and we're so grateful that you come in and shared all of that with us, because it's so insightful. So thank you so much.
Betsy, thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Shamila and I'm just here visiting my mum who's in residential aged care. She's got dementia, Alzheimer's, and I'm her primary carer outside of aged care. Hi Mum, how are you going today? We're just here talking together about the Nightingale Nurse Program through Dementia Australia. So we've been a part of it for about 2 months now, and we've got a lovely clinical nurse consultant called Lee Bryson coming to meet with us today. Hi, Lee.
Hi, I'm Lee. I'm the nurse, the clinical nurse consultant from Dementia Australia.
Right.
From the Nightingale Program. Would you like that brochure?
Oh, I love that.
You are.
I haven't got one like that.
I'm Lee.
Lovely to meet you. So glad you can make it today. Thank you. We were just discussing how it's so convenient that you come out to us, like Mum was saying, and it's really great.
So how you been going?
Busy as always, usually busy.
If you or someone you love has just received a dementia diagnosis, you might well be thinking, I don't need palliative care. Not yet anyway. But if one day you do, you'll be much better off if you've been thinking ahead.
Broadly, palliative care is palliative care, and good palliative care really does fall under the same umbrella. However, for someone living with dementia, yes, it can be quite protracted. So it might be quite different to a cancer diagnosis, which might be, quite quick. The other thing we need to think about too is for someone living with dementia, their ability to make decisions on their behalf at some point is likely to be compromised by cognition, by communication. So they might go from being really independent about making decisions to needing some support, to needing someone else to make them on their behalf. So that's why we really focus on getting in early.
This is Jayne Littledyke. She's the Nightingale Program Manager at Dementia Australia.
So the Nightingale Program is a nurse-led, dementia-specific palliative care program that's currently available in South Australia and a few specific locations in New South Wales. Hey Jayne,
Hi,
welcome.
thank you.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
A lot of our listeners maybe aren't familiar with palliative care.
Yeah.
Would you be able to sort of just outline exactly what that is?
So palliative care is the care that somebody living with a diagnosis that might be life-limiting or terminal, so something that's not reversible. So we're looking at management of symptoms but not curative. So living well, having good quality of life, having choice, having symptoms met from all aspects but not reversing. Yeah.
But I guess when people use the term palliative care, I think most people probably that assumes that means someone comes in, you start giving some morphine and it just sort of eases them out. Is that what palliative care is?
No, it's not. Very, very commonly thought though, and not deceiving general public, in all honesty, there's still sort of threads of that through the health profession.
So what is it? Like what practically are you doing? Like if you get the call to come in and help a family, what do you do?
Look, it depends on the person. So we meet the person where they're at and what are their goals, what's pressing for them, what triggered that referral to us. So that's where we start.
How far before death might this be?
It should be from the point of diagnosis. So when someone is delivered a terminal diagnosis, so when they're told that what you're living with now isn't reversible, good palliative care, so best practice palliative care starts at that point in time.
So what, years out?
But that could be
Absolutely.
a long, long stretch.
Absolutely, many years. And it might be that it starts with a conversation about this is your diagnosis, this is maybe the trajectory that we think, and what we need to start talking about is advanced planning. So what are your wishes? Documenting them now, talking to the people around you, the health professionals, the people that support you about what you want as things progress. That might be all you need at that point in time, but those decisions, that's been informed and discussed at a really important turning point.
That really surprises me. So you guys start at the very early stages and get down all the notes on what that person might like or what direction to lead them in. Is that right?
Absolutely. So look, we do it as much as we possibly can. Obviously, there's limitations on workforce and those bits and pieces, but what we, across Dementia Australia, so might not just be the program that I work in, might be other services within Dementia Australia, absolutely have conversations with people around advanced care planning, completing an advanced care directive, and what their diagnosis looks like and how things might progress so they can plan and be proactive about that.
Because we were talking before, Jim and I, who explained, well, he's having a lot of fun, doing a lot of great things and trying to be focused on that. And that's positive. And the family equally is like, let's focus on all the great things. So I can understand hearing Jim say, I don't really want to think about that.
Oh, understood. Yeah. And not everybody does, if I'm honest. Not everybody will want a palliative approach to care. Not everybody wants to engage in those conversations. Very commonly not. But I guess
it's frightening,
yeah,
isn't it? It's frightening to face what's ahead.
It is, but I wonder if we, it's the language that we use. It's the stigma attached with that language. So the stigma attached to palliative care, if you go in and actually have an honest conversation about what it really means and that it's empowering and that we're enabling choice and that it's not morphine at end of life, and really open people up to it and meet them where they're at. Sometimes it takes a bit of time. It might not be that I can pop out to somebody's home and in the first visit, build rapport or connection that they feel like they're happy to have that conversation, but leave a little bit of information so they can digest it. And next time we come back in, we might approach it in a different way.
So do you have the availability to go out pretty early to people to try and build some rapport and connection prior to, obviously palliative care always makes you think of the last stages.
Absolutely.
So do you sort of do like a gentle lead up for the family so as you can be across everything for those final stages to try and
absolutely,
make it as easy as possible?
As much as possible, certainly within what we can offer as with staffing. But yes, very much so. And people can come into Dementia Australia even pre-diagnosis at any point and receive service. And start those conversations early and prepare and be proactive because, as you said before, dementia can be quite long. It can be quite a long journey.
Exactly.
So we really want to get in early when someone can make some decisions and choices on behalf of themselves.
And what are the sorts of decisions they might be making?
Yeah, lots of different things, I guess. So if you think about a dementia diagnosis, it might be that as someone, progresses or moves through that, there's some changes around where they might be able to live or receive care. If I can no longer care for myself, I'd like to stay at home and I'd like to receive this sort of care, or I might like to transition into residential care. Things around if I can no longer recognise family or people close to me, I don't want care that might prolong or is aimed at prolonging my life. What I want is to be relieved of symptoms of distress. I want to be able to access the garden. I want to be comfortable. I want people that are close to me to be around if able. So those sorts of things around, what's meaningful to you and what might you like as things change.
Can you be really specific and say at the end, here's the music I want, here's
absolutely.
the people I want around.
The colour lipstick I want to wear.
I want some balloons in the room. It's that specific.
You can be, yeah. It doesn't mean that necessarily there's a guarantee. But absolutely, I've had people be incredibly specific about what they do and don't want, and it's very empowering for their families to know that, even post-death, what they might like as well, into that as well. So yes, people do want to communicate everything.
Because we're all registered nurses and with probably a lot of experience between us all, and each, we can come out and talk to you about different things that might be affecting your quality of life.
All right. So we can ask questions, and dementia is going to be that lifelong thing for you. And we're lucky you're 82 and you're actually incredibly well physically, but we don't know what's coming and we don't know how long it'll go, and hopefully when it's your time it'll be in your sleep peacefully, but if it's not, we've got end-of-life support coming for you and me and anyone else in the family.
I understand that. And I guess you have always to be attached to some form of dementia care support that takes you to the end.
And this is it, dementia.
That is very important.
It's very important.
It is hard.
Yeah,
and nobody can say how long dementia will take when you will be in that crisis at the end.
But that it is a life-limiting disease.
Yes, it is.
And, it's not going to get better. So it is good to have for everyone to have some support,
Is palliative care different? Does it need to be approached in a different way for people living with dementia compared with other conditions?
Look, broadly, palliative care is palliative care, and good palliative care really does fall under the same umbrella. However, for someone living with dementia, yes, it can be quite protracted. So it might be quite different to a cancer diagnosis, which might be, quite quick. There's so many different types of dementia, and some of them you might be, 10, 15, potentially longer post-diagnosis to end of life. The other thing we need to think about too is for someone living with dementia, their ability to make decisions on their behalf at some point is likely to be compromised by cognition, by communication. So they might go from being really independent about making decisions to needing some support, to needing someone else to make them on their behalf. So that's why we really focus on getting in early so that someone has got the opportunity, like you were talking about, to write down, what's important to them, so that when those decisions perhaps need extra support, that we're guided by something that's meaningful, that's them, that we're, optimising their choice and dignity. So it is different. The other thing, I guess, that's tricky is that most palliative care tools, I guess, that we have or models of care are based on oncology, because that is, broadly the biggest focus around palliative care is cancer, even though dementia is the leading cause of death. So there is work to do in that space around really understanding the progression and the key turning points for someone heading into a terminal phase.
How is palliative care delivered if someone's just living at home?
We aim to keep people at home if that's where they want to be, and it fluctuates. So it might literally be that we just pop out once every 4 to 6 weeks, see how things are going, do a really broad assessment of symptoms, check over their medicines, what's happening in their life, how they're living, and really be there for the family a lot of the time, that practical support. So something's changed, talk to me about it, what is it? And engaging with other health professionals. So if they're having some home care support, or the GP's doing something, or somebody else is involved, that we liaise with everybody and try and keep everybody connected.
I think you're sensitively circling around something that I guess many families might experience when someone's living with dementia, and that's at a certain point the views might diverge between what the individual wants and what the family wants, or who is best placed to make a decision. So am I right in hearing from what you're saying that that's part of your role, is to help navigate that for a family?
Absolutely. Yeah, very tricky. And to add to that, sometimes not everybody within the family has the same view either.
Yeah.
So, getting everybody on the same page, there can be a lot of grief and loss. So particularly, a common example might be that someone has in a sense promised that they'll keep their partner at home to end of life, but they're frail themselves, or they've got, there's lots of other things that are going on in their world, and that is just not something that we're going to be able to achieve. And sometimes that does happen. And so really supporting them to know we're going to transition somebody into another care environment, so probably residential care a lot of the time, and supporting what their relationship might still be and how they can still provide care and be important in that, but really managing that grief and loss that goes along with that as well. If that goes beyond what we can do as nurses, we'd obviously, with consent, if they want it, support them to go into counselling or something else as well, so that they get that care that they need as well.
I think at the end it can be very sudden for people, big build-up, and then it happens. And then the residential aged care facility wants you to pack up and go. Yeah. You're being asked to make a lot of decisions very quickly. Does the palliative care stretch beyond the point of death?
Absolutely. So palliative care goes into bereavement care for families or someone really close around, and we really should offer it, in all honesty, for at least 6 months post. Doesn't always happen because of limitations in services.
I think that's fantastic, because that's the time when people really do sort of realise the impact of what's happening.
Absolutely. And also, like you say, things, residential care, you pack up fairly, and that's it. Someone's at home, there's busyness when someone's dying. There's people in and out all the time. There's people checking in, they're calling. You get past the stage of the funeral or whatever it is that you might celebrate that person's life, and it stops. And so that
quite abruptly.
Yeah, it can be incredibly challenging. So yes, absolutely, good palliative care continues into bereavement support for families.
There will be people listening to this that think, this is all very interesting, but I don't really want to think about it, and I definitely don't want to talk about it. What would you say to them?
Well, look, we're all going to die.
That's for sure.
Yep. So I think that, yes, it's uncomfortable, but it's going to be uncomfortable at any point in time that you have that conversation, and best to start it early and really think about what's important to you and about living well. So when we talk about palliative care, what we're talking about is living well, optimising the life that you have now and living your best life until the end of your life. So really focusing it in that way, yeah.
It's fascinating really how life is so predictable, yet we all shy away from
this particular
the final
feature.
curtain.
Yeah.
And you know, it is the inevitable, isn't it? So the more planning that goes into it, the more likely that it's going to be along the wishes of the person
Most definitely.
who's going through the curtain.
Yeah, and it's going to be gentler on the people that you care about.
Jayne, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jayne. Hold the Moment is a podcast from Dementia Australia, produced by Dead Set Studios.
You can find more episodes and resources on Dementia Australia's website, dementia.org.au. And make sure you're following Hold the Moment so you don't miss an episode.
This show is hosted by me, Jim Rogers.
And by me, Hamish MacDonald. The executive producers are Kelly Reardon and Sarah Dabro. The producer is Liam Reardon. Production manager is Anne Chesterman. Sound design by Slade Gibson.
And a special thanks to the whole team at Dementia Australia and to everyone who shared their stories on this podcast.